and good morning, everyone. Niall and I are delighted to be here with you this morning, albeit virtually, to present the Smart Region Framework for the Southern Region, a framework that many of you attending this morning were integral to both informing and validating. Next slide, please. The research, as you've heard, was commissioned by the Southern Regional Assembly. That took place in 2021 with a focus on defining and implementing a smart Southern region. And we'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate the Assembly on its ambition in this regard. Some of the core work packages that the research programme included was understanding what a smart region is. As Karen indicated there in her presentation, there's no real clear definition of what that is. And so through our research, we worked on developing a bespoke smart Southern region model and definition that both meets the needs of the region, but also speaks to the opportunities that the region presents, given that this is a very large and diverse region. It involved developing a smart mapping tool, which enabled us to begin to capture what is already happening on the ground. As David said earlier, this work is not happening in a vacuum, and a tool that can be updated on a regular and consistent basis. And very importantly, it was about the region itself defining its level of maturity in terms of its smart journey, while also setting out plans for its improvement and future measurement. And at this point, I think I'd like to acknowledge and thank Michael Healy and the Digital Transformation Unit within Limerick City and County Council for leading on the mapping component of this work programme. Next slide, please. As David mentioned, this represents the start of a journey rather than its end, and critical to the approach we adopted was a process of co-production of the Smart Southern Regional Model, of engagement with a wide range of stakeholders to ensure that any framework taken forward met not only the needs of the region, but also harnessed the opportunities it presented, and that the resulting model will be shared with and validated by those same stakeholders who will now need to work hand in hand with the Regional Assembly to turn this into a reality. Significantly, there was notable alignment in how a smart region was envisaged by all the stakeholders and how its drivers are evolving. And this in turn then informed our parallel research stream into reviewing other smart regions in operation. Next slide, please. It's important to note that this research did not take place in isolation of wider policy. Understandably, the starting point for us was the 2020 RESUS, which had a stated regional policy objective relating to smart cities and regions, as well as 3 core pillars relating to the creation of a livable region, a green region, and a creative innovation region. And indeed, as Kevin mentioned earlier, the SMART really is transgental across all the regional policy objectives of the RESUS document. Building smart places starts with people, not technology. And it was essential, therefore, that the lens applied to this research recognised that the smart place has become interwoven with that of sustainable development, evidenced by the Sustainable Development Goals, the EU Green Deal, and more recently, the EU Cohesion Programme from 2021 and 27, where it has that emphasis on a smarter Europe. More and more, we see the concept of smart and sustainable becoming intertwined with the ideal of creating livable places, an evolution that came across as critically important to the stakeholders of this region, thus bringing policies as they relate to town centre regeneration, creativity, and smart villages to the fore. And with a growing emphasis on the city as a service, the smarter provision of services and more integrated and responsive public administrations, the role of technology, innovation, digitalization, and big data, for example, continue to be key, albeit as enablers rather than drivers. Next slide, please. As David mentioned, The development of the Smart Southern Region is not happening in a vacuum. In addition to setting the research in this wider policy context, we were also aware, not least through our role in the All Ireland Smart Cities Forum, that the development of a smart region was not going to take place in a vacuum. That within the region, there are a wide number of innovative smart programs already underway, operating at different scales, embracing technology and digitalization in different ways, meeting particular local needs and challenges, but all setting the foundation for the Smart Southern Region. Next slide, please. Equally important was that these smart initiatives were not just confined to the region's cities, but were also taking place in towns, networks of towns, and our villages, re-emphasizing that the concept of smart places extends beyond the realm of the city and out into the wider region. And this was importantly where the smart mapping tool comes into play, is that a number of these initiatives, they're not well known, and sometimes we had to dig a little bit deep to find out about their existence, but they are there, and it is important that they are celebrated and promoted and the learning shared. Next slide, please. The development of smart regions hinges on both formal and informal processes, and one such formal process has been the requirement of each local authority to produce a digital strategy. There are strong synergies across the resulting strategies within this region, identifying key themes and tools that can be harnessed to progress the region's smart journey. Actions which are open to inter-county collaboration, like climate change, skills, for example, and while also firmly establishing the willingness at local level to embrace innovation, digitalization, and change. Next slide, please. In parallel, we spent time investigating what was happening elsewhere in terms of smart region development, looking at their drivers, the stakeholders involved, their core goals, how they were resourced, and the value added that such concepts can bring to place. I think the examples that we're about to highlight, they address some of those concerns that have been flagged earlier by both Kevin and Karen in terms of how we work and needing to make that shift away from, I suppose, more traditional hierarchical structures and models to more network-like structures. Next slide, please. We'll hear shortly from one of the case studies that we discussed within our report series focusing on Eindhoven Brainport, but just to flag 3 other ones here now. In Finland, the 6-city strategy is supporting sustainable urban development. That at a local regional level also tackles global challenges of issues like climate change, changing demographics, the circular economy, etc. All of which, when we look at what's happening within this region, is very relevant to the region's commitment to blue, green infrastructure and 10-minute towns, for example. A key delivery tool utilised by Finland is the concept of agile partnering, whereby companies develop their products and services in close collaboration with residents and government. We see that happening a little bit through the work of Enterprise Ireland and the SBIR programmes, but there is scope for that to be developed at a greater scale and with a wider range of partners involved. And indeed, within the Finland process, they share their lessons and innovations through open platforms with other interested places, thus making cities stronger together. And they utilize the process of whereby a particular theme or sector is investigated across potentially 2 or more cities, thus ensuring that in different geographical settings, how these concepts play out is captured. And I think that just develops a richer level of learning in the process. Next slide, please. In Greater Phoenix, the emphasis was on adopting a place-based approach that recognises that challenges faced by its cities and towns were largely the same, and recognise the value added of operating at the level of the functional territory, with the emphasis being on one region, one voice. Here, a core element of their programme was the use of smart living labs, and this very much recognised the role of academia and research in supporting co-creation and co-production of solutions. And also a strong emphasis placed on looking at all these various digital roadmaps and strategies that might exist within the region and how you achieve greater alignment between them. And I think there's real lessons here in terms of this region's commitment to being a learning region. Next slide, please. In Germany, Baden-Württemberg, like the southern region, is a mix of urban and rural. In 2017, it published a regional digital strategy with aspirations in future mobility, digital economy, digital education, digital health, etc. It represented the adoption of a set of regional priority actions that address real-life challenges and opportunities, with the decisions then in terms of what is taken forward decentralized down to the local community level. This ensures that quick wins are achieved for the communities while also lighthouse projects being progressed, and thus ensuring real positive utilization of limited resources available, both in terms of funding, but also people's time, which is increasingly stretched. And it also ensures that most important thing of local buy-in and ownership of the programme. Through this regional engagement at both local, national and international analysis of what is happening with SMART and how its strategies are evolving, this has led to a very clear pathway for the SMART Southern region, which I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Niall, who will walk you through that next step of the research.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to present this work. The first thing that we did was try to define for ourselves what does a smart region mean in this context of the southern region. And this is our conclusion, which we can discuss it, and then we'll be glad to answer questions. But a smart region is something that's working in collaboration, leveraging technology and open data to create vibrant, sustainable, livable cities, towns, and communities. And I suppose, how did that come about? If you go to the next slide, please. This is a framework that evolved from our research. When I say our research, it's probably fair to say, Caroline mentioned co-creation. So we were in a lucky position, I suppose, we facilitated the process where a broad set of representatives from the southern region were able to define one possible future for themselves. And again, before going into any detail, I suppose there's strong parallels with the examples that Caroline has just shown. The concept of placemaking, engagement, and a society, a broad engagement society emerged strongly within our work. So what you see here is just a set of concentric circles. But these circles start at the center and work their way out into elements that we I suppose emerged as a kind of framework for a smart region. It starts with place in the center, and that's been mentioned so much so this morning so far, that I think people overwhelmingly want to feel proud about the place they live in. And this goes beyond their work environment, goes into the cultural amenities, the public realm. The idea that they are, it's a proud to live in. Quality of life is a term that continuously erodes as the essential primary goal in a smart region, smart area, smart community, whatever it may be. The first building block in that would be, which is layer number 2, engagement and subsidiarity. An engagement level is that there's a strong belief that its success will be dependent on the commitment and the engagement of those. And again, from a subsidiarity point of view, the more the representative stakeholders within that area, within the region, can make decisions for themselves, the more likely success will be that. So that is engagement and subsidiarity. Collaboration is is the next one. The sense that this is a collective thing. That there are benefits, and certainly there are benefits that can be organised for the SOA or the focal point in this. That strong benefits can arise. That it is a collective effort. The notion of the quadruple helix came up over and over again. Society, local authorities, the academia, commercial entities, and public partnerships, whatever they may be, are involved, is fundamental. And moving out again, we now get to where, beginning to get to where the technology might enable. But first of all, we have this term called connected. The idea that smart city offices are pretty mature in this country and elsewhere. The concept of a smart region is an emerging concept, much more difficult to find. For one of the reasons is the relationship between the stakeholders is completely different. For example, the relationship with Irish Water in the region is completely different from Irish Water in a city context. There's a scale difference. But connected means, in this case, multimodal corridors, energy, and the kind of technology, and the water to waste the energy. And the technology would just be one part of things like broadband, which we might assume to be, the primary infrastructure within a smart context. It's just one of them. And then we move out again to the data.
Niall, sorry, can I just interrupt you there for a second? The sound isn't great, but seems to be better when you lean. Apologies then to interrupt. When you lean into the laptop, yeah, we're just getting a couple of messages there. Yeah, it's quite muffled, and I just don't want people to lose out on what you're saying. So apologies for interrupting. Thank you.
Maybe go back to the previous slide. Right. Okay. Apologies for that. The sound. Okay. Well, I was talking about connected, and now I'm talking about the technology. So it was mentioned there earlier about the data agenda. So there's three things that came out and emerged from a technology point of view. One is, yes, having data to make real-time and evidence-based decisions, which is important for anything. And then there's probably two categories of use of technology. One was in efficiency and one was in an innovation kind of context. The efficiency would mean, for example, the services that are offered by local authorities, perhaps going online. Online ticketing for travel, etc. And then there's a much more innovative approach whereby, for example, a city within a southern region could be a pilot for a certain technology. We came up with one example for free transport. So that is, the technology is there at that level, just completely as an enabler, as we discussed before. And the final layer on the outside is the idea that this is coordinated and it has some kind of destination. This needs to be, it's a governance, an alignment, and who does what, when do they do it, and why do they do it. We go to the next slide, please. So that emerged from the interviews that we had with representatives from right across kind of the societal elements within the southern region. What we did then is we got people back in a room, and those and others remain still representing as the breadth of as broad as we could possibly do. We brought people back in the room and workshop. Okay, this is a framework, fine. What do we do about it? And how can we start implementing it? So two outcomes came from that. First was a description of what does this mean, and how might we describe where we're at and where we might go in the future. So this slide here represents what we call a maturity model. And we took the 6 elements of the framework, we condensed it into 4 for practical reasons, and then began to sort of map out what it might look like now, or in a very immature state, and in an ideal state, and then 2 phases in between. And just for time, I'll take one of those. So, but in the center, we've got connected infrastructure. A description of a very immature connected infrastructure might be the lack of access to funding for the infrastructure, no real-time data, no ability to make any decision based on data, very immature infrastructure, very poor broadband, maybe projects going on in this area but discrete. Next level up, a more mature description. Sorry, if we go back, please. That there would be some level of regional cross-domain planning. There might be the concept of a 10-minute town at least being attempted, evidence of a regional-wide technology implementation. Again, a next level of maturity might be we have good infrastructure such as broadband, wastewater to match population growth, and there's evidence of funding and delivery of programs. And an ideal might be the existence of enabling infrastructure in place, strong evidence-based planning, and we are at that 10-15-minute capability. So the attendees map this out in each of those areas so that we could possibly then understand where we are and what the next steps would be. If I go to the next stage, the next slide, please. So we then discussed how do we get things rolling? We came up with this kind of, what I see here is a kind of 4 blocks, 4-stage short-term implementation. I don't know if you call it a strategy or not, for want of a better word, the strategy. The first element of this would be to create a vision. And I think the framework as it's presented is a starting point for that. To understand from the regional assembly's point of view who the stakeholders are. And I think, to be fair, this in a regional context, this is much more difficult than in a city context. It's much more confined. Responsibilities are much, I suppose, condensed within a city context. So to understand who the stakeholders are, bringing them together, and then some kind of an alignment. There is a good example of this, of what an alignment could look like. When Limerick County and City joined together, that was the catalyst for the authority, the local universities, the IDA, Enterprise Ireland, to come together and to agree a charter to develop the city, and they signed this charter. So there's a good example there of what an alignment process may be. Next to that is probably in parallel, there is this recognition that this does at one level need funding, which needs to be sourced, and at the second, and in parallel with that, there is this policy alignment that local development plans, etc., must align with the RESIS, and that process must be in place, must fall into place. From an implementation and action point of view, the first 2 elements that were discussed was building up competency with the local authorities, which I know the regional assembly have already begun to do. And then from a practical point of view, it was deemed appropriate to focus on in domains, set goals, pick high impact areas which you should go after. So do it by not in a general sense, but in an independent sense. And lastly, in terms of just kicking the ball and doing something, there is good practice nationally, internationally, and mentioned in the examples that Caroline had described, the idea that we could do this by challenge, so that within a domain, have a societal goal, we put a challenge out, and seek engagement from broad societal grouping. Okay, next slide, please. That's really, I do want to just, Caroline mentioned the mapping tool that was developed. This is a rather early version of it. The guys in Maynooth might be really did this, and it was part of the work. So that's just a little show. I think it might be discussed later. So we will move on to the next slide, please. So finally, just we have, I can't see everything on the slide because the Zoom picture, but there are the recommendations. There's 5 simple recommendations to conclude. One was commitment from local authorities, and that's critical really to socializing the vision and getting involved. Stakeholder identification, beyond the local authorities, there's a different set of stakeholder or at least a different level of involvement from stakeholders that you would see in the city context. And this will be critical. Thirdly, seeking commitment from that group. This will be, it's kind of self-evident. Once we identify them, we need to get commitment from them. I mentioned here the map again. Caroline mentioned the celebration of what's going on, and it does help us to work towards, it does help in planning purposes as well to understand what activities are going on, where they're going on, and identify gaps. And lastly, through the RSA to develop an action plan and begin to implement. So I thank you very much. That's my contribution.